Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 1. Las Noches. Harribel lay in her quarters doing what some of the other Arrancar would have found shocking, being bored. She had been constantly training with her fraction, but she felt like there was something that she needed more than them. She had been feeling a need for something for a very long time, and it was starting to become unbearable. She longed for a companion. It was an odd feeling, considering how she was a hollow. Hollows by nature didn't seek out others for anything else than the need for strength in numbers. She knew that best, having gathered her fraction for that very reason. But in the time she spent in her new form as an Arrancar, a new feeling had grown inside her, perhaps due to her becoming more like a soul reaper. She longed for someone, maybe a lover, maybe just a friend. But she wanted someone who she could stand together with. She sat up off the couch and looked around, hearing her friends bickering in the adjacent room. Apache. Mila rose. Sung Sun, she addressed. The Tres Bestia quickly ended their argument and rushed into her room. You called, Master Harribel? Sung Sun asked. Yes, we're leaving for the world of the living. Apache looked at her master confused. The Espada explained, I'm tired of this dismal place. I've grown bored with Las Noches and I'm starting to get tired of hanging around the Espadas. Turning around, she opened up a garganta and walked through. Come along, girls. The Tres Bestia looked at each other. They've never seen their master bored before, so they went after her to see what she was looking for. Harribel opened up a garganta and stepped into the black abyss. If she couldn't find what she was seeking in Hueco Mundo, she would find it elsewhere. Surely there was someone in the world of the living worth her attention. Besides, personally she preferred the vibrant colors of the human realm to the monotone black and white lands of Hueco Mundo. They stepped out into the world of the living. Looking around, Harribel took in the blue sky above her, the real sky and not what Aizen had created, and felt the sunny rays shine down on her. She turned to her subordinates and nodded. You may do as you please. Don't cause trouble, she warned. We do not need the Soul Reapers catching on to us. Yes, Master, the three said in unison before taking off to pursue their own interests. Putting the three out of her mind, Harribel used Sonido to take herself to the town park. Greenery was foreign to her and she enjoyed what little opportunity she had to see it. But the Espada soon became bored despite the serene view. Remembering her purpose, she soon started to explore the town, hoping to find someone worthy. But alas, she found no human worthy of her. She'd hoped to find someone who was spiritually aware, as she knew that there were some born in this world who could see hollows and souls, but she didn't see anyone. Further, most of the humans she encountered were vain or obnoxious. Harribel spent the entire day but found nobody. And finally, just as the sun was beginning to set, she found him. Walking in the sky, Harribel noticed something that stood out amongst all the colors of the town, a head full of orange hair. Amused, Harribel neared the human and got a closer look at him. She saw that it was a young man, 15 at the most. Harribel smiled from behind her mask when she saw how handsome he was. Curious about the boy, she secretly followed him and watched in amusement as he beat up a gang of punks. What intrigued her the most, however, was that she saw that the boy was spiritually aware, talking to a plus who'd been bound to that spot. So you're spiritually aware, she noted, her fascination with the boy growing as she continued watching him and seeing how kind-hearted he was. Following the boy home, she kept herself at a safe distance. Yes, the boy could see spirits, but she wanted to observe him some more to get a better measure of him. Following him to his home, she sat down on the house opposite his window and watched him. She couldn't understand it, but something about him made her feel drawn to the boy. Is it simply my desire for a companion? She thought to herself as she continued watching the boy. Or is it something else? If she found herself intrigued by the boy, her fascination only grew when she saw him encounter a Soul Reaper who popped up in his room all of a sudden. Keeping her spiritual pressure undetectable, she watched as the raven-haired Soul Reaper explained to the boy, whom she learned was named Ichigo Kurosaki, about the Soul Society and of Hollows. She found their banter to be charming until she sensed the presence of another hollow. She thought about intervening but decided against it. Instead, she watched as events unfolded before her as a silent spectator. She watched as the hollow attacked Ichigo and his family. Part of her wanted to jump in and save them, especially after the Soul Reaper received a dangerous wound, but she told herself no. She would wait until the Soul Reaper was dead. If Ichigo were killed, she would take his soul back to Hueco Mundo and have Aizen turn him into an Arrancar. Perhaps she could grab his sisters to make him more content there as well. But then something happened that made her shocked to the core. She watched as the Soul Reaper stabbed her Zanpakuto into the boy's chest, transforming him into a Soul Reaper. Seeing him in the black garments of the Soul Reapers made Harribel smile. This boy is certainly more intriguing than I thought. Lord Aizen said that the chance of surviving a power transfer is in the single digits. For him to survive that, makes me want him more. She turned away as Ichigo slayed the pitiful hollow, leaving him for now. She returned to Hueco Mundo and went to her quarters, finding the Trace Bestia waiting for her. Master, Sung Sun inquired. The olive-haired Arrancar couldn't see Harribel's face but knew her master was smiling. Did you find what you were looking for? She asked. The three had started to get worried and had waited for their master to return. Walking past them, Harribel merely nodded. Yes, I've found someone quite intriguing. Retiring to her quarters, Harribel lay on her bed and closed her eyes, images of the orange-haired youth popping into her head. Ichigo Kurosaki, E.H. The next evening, Karakura Town, Ichigo's room. Ichigo groaned as he lay on his bed, Rukia sound asleep in his closet. He sighed, knowing that he was now roped into taking her role as a Soul Reaper. He wondered how else his life could become strange. He looked out the window and saw the crescent moon rising into the sky. Sighing, he felt a little lost. The boy didn't know who to turn to. Rukia wasn't human and couldn't understand what a responsibility this was to shoulder. More so than that, as helpful as a mentor she was, he didn't consider her someone whom he could open up to with her snobby attitude. His father didn't see spirits, so he couldn't turn to him, and he certainly couldn't put the burden on his sisters. Looking at the crescent moon, he wished that he had someone to talk to. Almost as soon as the wish escaped his mind, something tapped on his window. Sitting up, Ichigo heard it again and realized someone was throwing pebbles at his window. Opening his window, he looked around to see who was trying to get his attention. Up here, Ichigo looked up and saw someone standing on the rooftop next to his house. His eyes widened when he got a good look at her. She looked like something completely different from anything he'd seen before. Who are you? The woman put a hand on her chest and cocked her head, her emerald eyes looking at the boy while she smiled behind her mask. I'm Tear Harribel. Nice to meet you, Ichigo Kurosaki. Chapter 2, Kurosaki House, Ichigo's room. Ichigo stared at the stranger in awe. She looked like nothing Ichigo had ever encountered in his life. Her head of wild, blonde hair heavily contrasted against her mocha dark skin. Eyes as green as emerald stared at the boy at the window. Her outfit, though, was what caught Ichigo's eye. She wore a white hakama as well as black boots. Her top exposed her belly and the underside of her breasts while the top reached all the way up to her face, obscuring the lower half of the woman's face. Behind her mask, Harribel smiled at Ichigo's reaction. What's the matter, boy? She said, cocking her head playfully. Cat got your tongue. Shaking off the shock, Ichigo turned to his closet and saw that Rukia was still asleep. Turning back to his visitor, he began to speak. Just who are you? Didn't you hear me? The woman replied. My name is Tear Harribel. She pointed to the glove on Ichigo's desk. It was the glove Rukia used to push Ichigo out of his human body. Discard your human shell, Ichigo. I don't wish to speak to you from halfway across a building. Cautious of this strange, exotically dressed woman, Ichigo complied. He grabbed the glove and popped out of his human body, now garbed in his Soul Reaper clothes. Climbing out of his window, he jumped through the air and landed on the rooftop, facing the woman. As he got closer though, he started to feel uneasy about her. He couldn't put his finger on it, but this woman reminded him very much of a hollow. Who are you? He asked again. Harribel rolled her eyes. Are you deaf, Ichigo? I told you my name already. She crossed her arms and shook her head. No, I heard your name, Tear. Call me Harribel. She offered her hand which Ichigo shook. Harribel then. It's just. His eyes turned to the sword strapped to her back and he became more confused than ever. He could tell that the weapon was a Zanpakuto, but this was clearly no Soul Reaper he was dealing with if Rukia was any measure to go by. What are you? I see. Harribel tipped her head back and surveyed the boy. By most standards he wasn't much, his spiritual pressure was weak and feeble. In fact, Harribel had to dial down on her own pressure or she might risk hurting the boy. All in good time. I suppose that's to be expected. You've only been a Soul Reaper for, what, 24 hours? She put a hand on her chest. Make no mistake, Ichigo, I am no Soul Reaper. I may appear to be human but I am a hollow. Hollow. Ichigo gasped, thinking he'd just walked into a trap. He drew his large Zanpakuto and pointed it at Harribel. Are you here to avenge those two hollows? He demanded to know. Harribel took a step forward, forcing Ichigo back. Ichigo tried to be brave but Harribel's intimidating look unnerved him. She kept advancing until Ichigo was at the edge of the roof. Holding up a finger, Harribel touched the tip of Ichigo's bulky Zanpakuto and pushed it to the side. Do you even know how to use a sword, Ichigo? She asked out of curiosity. Of course I do, Ichigo responded. Answer my question. Very well. Harribel shook her head. I don't care about mindless hollows you've slain, Ichigo. I'm here for you. Me, yes, you. Harribel paused for a moment to choose her words, not wanting to give the boy the wrong impression. She didn't want to come across as a whore who merely wanted to share his bed. She'd take it one step at a time. You intrigue me. A substitute Soul Reaper. She looked him up and down before smiling behind her mask. I must say, you'd look better in white. Ichigo blushed from how she was sizing him up. He didn't know what this hollow woman wanted but he was starting to get notice. He put his sword back up and scowled. Back off. If you're really a hollow, then why don't you have a mask? He asked, still unintimidated by Ichigo's sword in front of her face. Reaching down, she grabbed the zipper to her top and slowly, almost seductively, started to pull it up. As more of her bosom became exposed she saw Ichigo's cheeks turn pink in the moonlight and chuckled. A mask, you say? You mean? She reached the top and opened her top, exposing her mask fragments. This. Ichigo's eyes widened when he saw the hollow mask fragment on her face, the wicked teeth obscuring the lower half of her face while keeping enough of her nipples hidden. Your mask is broken? He asked, unable to take his eyes off her. He noticed the black gothic tattoo of the number 3 on her right breast and absent-mindedly wondered what it signified. Harribel chuckled again, cocking her head. I am an Arankar. We removed our masks to gain the powers of Soul Reapers. What's the matter, little boy? Disappointed, she teased before zipping her jacket back up. Shut up, Ichigo shouted, keeping his huge Zanpakuto at the ready. What exactly are you? Rukia never told me that hollows can remove their masks. Crossing her arms, Harribel looked at Ichigo amused. Yes, because after one day of being a Soul Reaper you know everything there is to know about hollows, she said sarcastically. She turned to the sword in her face and asked her question again. That's quite the hefty sword. Do you even know how to use it? She asked, her eyebrow raised. Of course I can, Ichigo said indignantly. Shrugging, Harribel turned away from the boy and walked away a few days. Very well then, little boy, she said, much to Ichigo's irritation. She reached out and hooked a finger around the ring to her Zanpakuto's hilt, slowly drawing it from her pink sheath. Gripping the hollowed short sword with one hand, she turned back to Ichigo and put up a stance. Show me. Sweating nervously, Ichigo moved slowly, circling around the woman who stayed still. He'd so many questions that his head threatened to explode. What does she want with me? Will she die if I cut through her mask like a regular hollow? His uncertainty grew from how Harribel stood still, her eyes not wavering as she circled each other. Bracing himself, Ichigo swung his massive Zanpakuto at the woman. Harribel parried the boy's attacks with ease. It was clear that the boy was inexperienced with using a blade. He might have begun to become accustomed to fighting hollows, but against another armed individual the boy was a novice. She parried Ichigo's attacks with ease. Had this been a deathmatch, she'd have easily dispatched the boy. He's nowhere near the level one want him to be. But, she smiled as he suddenly spun around, chopping wide. Harribel blocked easily but she skidded a few inches backwards. He has potential. This might be interesting after all. Ichigo became bolder as they continued fighting. He continuously glanced over at his house, wondering if Rukia could sense what was happening outside. He became worried that the woman might suddenly go after her and his family. But Harribel sensed his distraction and quickly moved in. In a flash, she knocked Ichigo's Zanpakuto out of the boy's hand, the huge Zanpakuto stabbing the ground. Ichigo froze when he found himself at the pointy end of Harribel's sword, the tip an inch from his throat. Lesson number 1. Never take your eyes off of your opponent, the blonde Arrancar chastised. Your concern for the girl and your family is touching, but I care little for ordinary humans and powerless soul reapers. When Ichigo's expression turned to horror, the woman chuckled. Yes, Ichigo, I know of Rukia's power loss. But I have no interest in her. She lowered her sword. I'm interested in you. I'd like to extend an offer. Sweating through his shihakusho, Ichigo panted while trying to recover his wind. He'd tried his best to defeat her but had been soundly defeated, and Harribel hadn't even broken a sweat. What offer? He asked as the woman walked towards his sword. Why should I believe anything you have to say? Aren't hollows, you know, evil? Despite his words and what Rukia told him, he couldn't help but get the impression that this woman, despite being an Arrancar, wasn't malevolent. Are all hollows evil? That's what you've been led to believe, isn't it? Harribel said, reaching Ichigo's Zanpakuto. Turning back to him, her eyes stared at him like emeralds in the night. Tell me, Ichigo, is every human good? When Ichigo realized what she was saying, she pulled his weapon out of the ground. I mean you no harm, Ichigo. You intrigue me. You and your power. Harribel thought of the word to describe her feelings towards his potential. Excites me, was what she wanted to say, but instead she said, fascinates me. She walked back over to Ichigo and offered him his sword. Here, your Zanpakuto. His hand hesitantly reaching for his weapon, Ichigo looked Harribel in the eyes. Though he could only see half of her face, he could feel a sense of honesty from the woman and felt that this woman truly didn't mean him any harm. You said you had a offer, he said. When Harribel sheathed her sword, he relaxed and sheathed his own. Quite. Your skills are poor. Your Zanpakuto may not feel heavy, but its size proved to be your detriment. Had I wished, I could kill you with little ease. You've no skill with a sword, but I can teach you. You can teach me. Why would you want to? Ichigo questioned. Because I want to. I can teach you how to become an effective swordsman. And perhaps, she started to unzip her jacket, I could teach you to be proficient in other areas. What? Ichigo gaped, knowing what she was offering. Laughing, Harribel zipped her top up again and shook her head. I'm only joking, but my offer still stands. She held out her hand. Well, Ichigo, do we have an accord? You're offering to teach me, but what do you want from me in return? Harribel chose her next words carefully. She wanted him to be her companion, perhaps more, but only after he'd proven he was worthy of her. I do not ask anything of you. My reasons are my own, but know this. I do not intend any harm upon you or your family. Taking her at her word, Ichigo took Harribel's hand and shook it, smiling at the woman. Okay, deal. So I guess this makes you my sensei. Amused by his wit, Harribel shook her head while chuckling. No need. Feel free to call me by my name. She turned around and walked away. I shall leave you for tonight, Ichigo. I'll see you tomorrow at midnight. Meet me here and we'll start you on your training. Ichigo nodded. I guess. Good night, Harribel. Turning her head, Harribel nodded in acknowledgement. Good night, Ichigo. I'll see you tomorrow. Ichigo wondered where the woman was going to go when she suddenly disappeared from sight. What the? Where'd she go? He looked around but there was no sign of her. Wow, he breathed in awe. He looked down at his hand and flexed it, still feeling the warmth of hers from their handshake. She's really something. Feeling exhausted, Ichigo returned to his room, sliding back into his human body and got into bed, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Chapter 3. The next evening, Ichigo's room. Laying on his bed, Ichigo nursed his aching shoulder, the pain caused by a wound courtesy of Orihime's hollow-feed brother, Sora. Rukia was once again asleep in the closet. Ichigo looked at the clock and saw that it was getting close to midnight. Ichigo took a deep breath and felt a little anxious. He'd already been in a fight to the death with the hollow Sora and he'd received his fair share of injuries. Sure, Rukia had healed him with her Kido, but he still felt small vestiges of pain. Rukia told him that it was natural and that the small pains he felt would fade the following day. An hour passed and Ichigo wondered if his new teacher was coming. Finally, just when Ichigo was starting to doze off, he heard a tapping at the window. Rubbing his eyes, he saw a certain blonde-haired Arrancar standing outside his window. Harribel. The woman put a finger to her covered lips, indicating Ichigo that he needed to keep quiet. She quietly opened his window. "Good evening, Ichigo." Her eyes scanned the boy and, as if she could read minds, her stare turned to his shoulder. "I see you've been busy since we've last met." "Hi, Harribel," Ichigo smiled before remembering the Soul Reaper sleeping in his closet. "Wait, we're going to train now. That is what we agreed to." "Yeah, but," he turned once more to the closet. "What about Rukia? What do I do if she gets an alert about a hollow and finds me gone?" he asked, wondering if maybe he should have thought this through. Harribel shook her head and reached into her pocket. "Have no fear, Ichigo," she replied. "My fraction will be ensuring that your training is uninterrupted." "Frack, you don't need to worry about it." She pulled out a pouch and gave it to Ichigo. "As for your friend, sprinkle a pinch of this over her." When Ichigo looked at her with trepidation, she shook her head. "I give you my word, Ichigo. It's not harmful. It is merely a sleeping agent that will ensure that she stays asleep. I'm many things but sadistic is not among them." Opening up the pouch Harribel gave him, Ichigo saw what looked like pink dust. He wondered again if this was right and if he'd thought this through. When he looked up at Harribel though, his judgment told him she could be trusted. Hoping that he wasn't wrong, Ichigo crept over to his closet and quietly opened the door. Rukia didn't stir while Ichigo reached into the pouch and took a pinch of pink dust out of it. He sprinkled the dust over Rukia's face. Inhaling the sleeping agent, Rukia sank into a deeper sleep, lightly snoring. Closing the door, Ichigo grabbed her glove and popped out of his human body. Putting his physical shell back into bed, Ichigo followed Harribel out the window, taking off into the night. He followed the Arrancar as best as he could but found that she was too fast. "Harribel, slow down," he finally said when he was starting to lose her. "HMPH. Harribel looked back at Ichigo and rolled her eyes. "If you can't keep up with me at this pace, you've a long way to go, boy." Harribel finally stopped, her feet touching soft grass. Reaching the blonde, Ichigo huffed and panted. He looked around and saw that they were in the middle of the forest that was on the mountain overlooking Karakura town. "Why are we here? This is a perfect spot for your training. No powerless Soul Reapers to interfere and no family to distract you." Ichigo scowled. He didn't like her tone. Drawing his sword, Ichigo gestured to Harribel's. You said you can teach me how to wield my sword better. But your sword is so much shorter than mine. How can you know of how to fight with a big weapon?" he asked out of curiosity. Facing the boy, Harribel reached for her sword and drew it. "Do not make such quick assumptions. You hardly know anything about me, let alone Arrancars." Stabbing his sword into the ground, Ichigo crossed his arms, "And just how am I supposed to trust you when I don't know anything about you?" he pointed out. The blonde gave a low chuckle. "If you want answers, you'll have to earn them. Treat me as a friend or as an enemy, that is up to you. But the first lesson you should take to heart tonight is this: when you see a person with their sword drawn." Harribel disappeared from Ichigo's sight. The boy gasped and reached for his Zanpakuto only to feel cold steel against his throat. He went still as Harribel held him at sword point, the woman humming in disappointment from behind him. "Don't ever take your hand off your sword in front of your enemy." Ichigo was thankful when Harribel took her sword away from his neck, only to yelp when Harribel put a boot to his back, knocking him away. As he stumbled he grabbed his sword and turned around. Putting up a stance, Harribel gestured for Ichigo to do the same. "Let us begin." A few hours later, "Your swings are still weak. You've a longer reach than me, use it." Harribel ducked another swing and swiped at Ichigo who blocked it. The impact sent him skidding backwards. Harribel was on Ichigo again, keeping up the pressure. Several trees lay cut down around them, victims of Ichigo's wild swings. Sweat dripped down Ichigo's back as he locked swords with Harribel, trying to push her away. "Don't bladalock," Harribel reminded him. "It boils down to who's stronger. And right now, that is not you. Ichigo cried out as Harribel pushed him backward, tripping over a fallen tree and tumbling to the ground. He panted as he tried to get up. Looking up, he saw Harribel, 1 foot on the tree, extending her hand towards him. Wow, he breathed as she helped him up. You're so strong. Harribel nodded, glad that Ichigo could see the clear gap of power between them. Having said that though, Harribel was also pleased at Ichigo's progress. In a matter of hours his skill with the Zanpakuto had increased. She was right when she ascertained his bountiful potential. To see him at his peak, Harribel mused. That's a thought that sends chills down my spine, among other things. She noticed how Ichigo kept rubbing his shoulder and raised an eyebrow. Are you okay? She asked, concerned for him. She dialed back on her strength to make sure she didn't pulverize him, and she made sure not to wound the boy, so to see him nursing his shoulder was concerning. Yeah, it's from earlier when I was fighting a hollow, he explained. My friend, Rukia, healed me, but I'm still feeling some pain. I see, Harribel noted. She sat down on a stump and gestured for Ichigo to join her. Tell me what happened. Sitting down on the ground next to her, Ichigo explained his earlier battle with Acidwire, aka Sora. So this hollow was your friend's brother? She asked. Yeah, Rukia told me that hollows attack their loved ones when they first transform. Ichigo suddenly felt uncomfortable when he thought of a serious question. Hey, Harribel, is that true? The woman nodded. That it is. The whole we hollows carry represents our desire to become human again. The urge to devour souls, for most hollows, is a result of that desire. So, did you attack the person you cared about when you became a hollow? The forest became filled with the music of silence while Harribel struggled to come up with an answer. No, she said before turning to the boy. I did not. I am not like other hollows. I do not devour souls. The stare from her emerald eyes made Ichigo feel a little ashamed. He did ask a very personal question after all. Sorry. It is more complicated than you know, Harribel admitted. How do I explain what a Vasto Lord is to him? She wondered. A Vasto Lord is a Manos Grande type of hollow. She struggled to explain to Ichigo how she even came into being. Harribel's name, her body and her powers were not her own. True, her personality was what kept her unique when she ascended from a Jillian to an Ijukas, but every part of her besides her mind was nothing but an amalgamation of countless hollows. And that was before Lord Aizen transformed me into an Arrancar. It is all right. I know that this must be quite conflicting for you. She reached down and put a hand on his shoulder. You are a soul reaper. I am a hollow. It is natural that you're confused. Ichigo smiled, glad that he didn't hit a nerve. He figured that there was something Harribel was keeping from him, but he didn't think she was lying. Feeling a familiar jolt of pain in his shoulder, he winced, causing Harribel to take her hand off of him. Ow. Your shoulder. Let me see it, Harribel requested. The boy loosened his top and let it slide down his shoulders. Harribel's gloved fingers touched the small scar on his shoulder, sensing the pain beneath it. Ichigo wondered what the woman was doing when he felt warm. He turned his head to see Harribel's hand glow yellow. As that, he started. Arrancars may not have Keto like you soul reapers, but the ability to use our spiritual energy to heal is simple enough. Ichigo sighed in relief as the pain in his shoulder melted. Though Rukia's healed the wound, Harribel's technique seemed to make all the aches and pains inside him fade away. He reached up and touched Harribel's hand. It felt like Harribel was a warm ember, soothing and tranquil. She's so different from any of the hollows I've seen. I guess she really is more like a soul reaper. I wonder what she was like before. When Harribel took her hand away, she heard Ichigo give a tiny groan of disappointment. I'm not going to do that with every bruise or cut you get. So don't go getting yourself hurt just so I can touch you, she teased. What? Ichigo stammered. The woman seemed to know just what to say to make his face resemble his name. Chuckling, Harribel stood up and helped Ichigo to his feet. I'm only joking. Still, this, Orihime, was it? She inquired. You seem quite fond of her. Yeah, we're good friends. Harribel frowned behind her mask, wondering if this Orihime was going to be a problem. Another time perhaps. The lightening of the sky told Harribel that dawn was approaching. Knowing she had to return to Hueco Mundo, she reached into her pocket and handed Ichigo a bracelet. Here. Taking it, Ichigo inspected the trinket. It was a simple black band with a red jewel dangling from it. What is it? Unfortunately, I cannot train you every night. That will be a signal to tell you that I'm waiting for you here. How will I know? When the jewel turns green, you'll know. She grabbed her sword, stabbed into another trunk, and sheathed it. I'll see you again soon, Ichigo. Good night, Harribel, Ichigo said, sheathing his own. Harribel nodded and disappeared from sight again, leaving Ichigo standing in the middle of the forest flustered. Okay, how does she keep doing that? Chapter 4. Sometime later, Ichigo and Harribel's sparring grounds. He's improving, the blonde Arankar noted as she dodged Ichigo's attack, sidestepping his slash and moving closer to him. Knowing her intent, Ichigo jumped back, landing on a stump and keeping his guard up. Every time we meet, I become more and more impressed. She and Ichigo went back and forth, their sparring almost becoming a dance as they became familiar with each other's fighting styles. Harribel was taken by surprise when Ichigo threw a kick out of nowhere and hit her in the side, landing on the ground with a thud. Making it to her feet, she looked up at her student, smiling behind her mask. She could tell that Ichigo would be a great warrior when he reached his potential. And yet, something's wrong. Harribel could sense it. In spite of Ichigo's progress, she could tell that his mind was elsewhere. The look in his eyes showed the shadow of anger and regret. Halting her movements, Harribel decided to see what was wrong with her student. Ichigo, enough. Why? Ichigo asked, wondering if this was a trick. A few times Harribel would call for a halt only to suddenly attack him again, reinforcing the fact that he couldn't rely on his enemy being honorable in a fight. I can still keep going. Sheathing her sword back into its pink sheath, Harribel walked over to her student and shook her head. Ichigo, I can tell that something is troubling you. You have the look of a boy who has the weight of the world on his shoulders. Harribel didn't know if she'd earned Ichigo's trust to be able to get him to open up to her. She was aware that Ichigo still saw her as a potential enemy, even with all the training she'd been giving him. Still, ever since she'd laid eyes on the orange-haired boy, she was determined to get to know the boy, almost to the point of obsession. Even after their multiple sparring, she still couldn't figure out what drew her to the boy. Ichigo was hesitant to tell her what was wrong. As Harribel thought, he didn't fully trust the woman. He appreciated her help, but he was still unsure about her motives and he didn't know what her end goal was. However, the sincerity in her eyes told Ichigo that she was merely trying to help him, and the need to open up to someone other than Rukia was too big to ignore. I met a certain hollow earlier at my mother's grave. Your mother? Harribel sat down on a stump and gestured for Ichigo to continue. You mentioned her before. You said she died when you were a child, she recalled when she inquired about his family. Continuing to stand before the white-clad woman, Ichigo looked down at the ground. Despite his victory over this certain hollow, he felt shame and regret. For years I thought that my mother was killed in an accident. That she died, because of me, he admitted, looking away as the memory of that horrific night came back to him. But I was wrong. It wasn't because of me. He turned back to Harribel and the woman saw anger in his eyes. Grand Fisher killed her. Harribel tilted her head back and nodded. She was aware of Grand Fisher, a low-life hollow who used a lure to ensnare victims. Ah, I see. Her sharp mind put two and two together. He used his lure to draw you and your mother in. And when you did, she left the sentence hang, not wanting to hurt Ichigo by saying the obvious. You met Grand Fisher again, I take it. You realized he was responsible. I did. He almost killed Yuzu and Karen before I intervened. Staring down at the ground, Ichigo balled his hands into fists. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to avenge Mom. I drove him off, but he escaped. Harribel could tell that the victory Ichigo achieved was, pun unintended, hollow. She could see that he needed closure in order to move on, or else wallow in self-pity and regret from his failure to destroy Grand Fisher. Yeah, but I know he'll come back. And when he does, I'll be ready. I'm not sure you will be, Harribel thought worriedly. She knew that Grand Fisher had returned to Hueco Mundo in defeat, if Isaringer had any truth to his words. She knew that he had set about to start the process of removing his mask to become an Arankar. And when he does, he might be too much for Ichigo. He's not ready to face an Arrancar yet. But the wheels in Harribel's head spun and an idea formed in her mind. It was risky, but Ichigo deserved to have his revenge. She'd always thought of Grand Fisher as nothing more than a parasite. Letting Ichigo kill him would be poetic. Ichigo, she started, getting up off the stump. If it is your wish, I could bring Grand Fisher to you. Ichigo stared in shock, forgetting that this woman was a hollow. You can. Harribel nodded before continuing. I can. If you're truly serious, then I will coax Grand Fisher to return to the world of the living for you to have your rematch. But Ichigo, her expression softened and she looked at Ichigo with worried eyes. Grand Fisher will be stronger than you remember. Your skills have sharpened, but even so you might not do it. Harribel blinked, astounded by Ichigo's determined stare. You're for sure? I am. Ichigo stabbed his sword into the ground, gripping the handle so hard his knuckles turned white. I owe it to Mom to avenge her. And to make sure that her killer doesn't do the same to anyone else. I don't care how strong he's become. I'll take him down just the same. I promise. The respect Harribel had for Ichigo grew from hearing his resolve. Nodding, she patted his shoulder. Very well. I will return to Hueco Mundo. Wait here until Grand Fisher arrives. How will you get him to come here? Hollows are like humans in many respects, Ichigo. Imbeciles like Grand Fisher have big, ridiculous egos. Manipulating him will be child's play. She waved a hand next to them. Ichigo jumped back when the air itself tore away and opened up to create a black, gaping maw. I shall return shortly. Be ready, Ichigo, she said, hoping that she was making the right decision. Before closing the portal, she turned to her student one last time. Good luck. Closing the portal behind her, Harribel departed for Hueco Mundo. Reaching the other side, she stepped out onto the white sands of the desert, trapped in endless night. In the distance was Las Noches, the huge white palace under the direction of Barragan, until her master revealed his intentions to the Soul Society. But instead of walking towards it, she headed in the opposite direction towards one of the many bunkers that littered the desert. Finding the one she wanted, she slowly walked down the stairs. In the distance she heard pained yelling and knew she found Grand Fisher. Now then, what to do? Harribel had to find a way to solve this conundrum. If Grand Fisher became an Arrancar like her, then Ichigo would stand no chance at all and she'd be forced to watch him be killed by the Hollow. But she soon found herself breathing a sigh of relief when she entered the room and found Grand Fisher alone. Strange. Iseringer and D. Roy said he came here to recover after his battle and begged to be made into an Arrancar. Where are they? The large Hollow sat in the middle, growling in frustration with his back to Harribel. Damn you, D. Roy and Iseringer. He shouted. You said you'd bring Eisen here to make me into a true Arrancar. Harribel saw pieces of his mask littering the ground and knew what the problem was, realizing her good fortune. Grand Fisher had removed his mask to become an Arrancar, but unlike her, who'd become an artificially created Arrancar with the power of Aizen's Hogyoku, he became what was considered a natural Arrancar, and thus his power increase wasn't significant. Grand Fisher. Turning his head, the Hollow's eyes widened when he saw that Harribel was standing there before him. Cheer, Harribel, he gasped before hissing in anger. What are you doing here? Choosing her words carefully, Harribel replied, I understand you lost to a Soul Reaper. He got lucky. Be that as it may, he is becoming a problem. I know where he is at the moment. Grand Fisher's hideous face neared hers, making her wish he'd put his mask back on. Tell me, I will end that brat. Harribel raised her hand and opened another portal. After you then. When Grand Fisher barreled past her into the void, she began to formulate her plan. She didn't know if Ichigo could take Grand Fisher as he was now, even with his measly power-up. Well, Ichigo, I said I'd let you fight Grand Fisher again. I never said I wouldn't lend a hand. Meanwhile, Ichigo was waiting patiently where Harribel had left him, the moon hanging in the sky as he sat on the stump. Is she serious? I'm going to fight Grand Fisher again. Ichigo was mentally prepared, but at the same time he was worried. The last time he fought Grand Fisher he was nearly killed, even with his training. Maybe I should grab Rukia. As of now Rukia was fast asleep in his closet, Harribel's sleeping dust keeping her in a deep slumber. At first Ichigo was worried that Harribel had tricked him into putting her into a coma, but when the sun came up Rukia would awaken all the same. But he soon dismissed the notion of asking Rukia for help. Just like when he fought Grand Fisher the first time, it was his fight and his alone. His ears perked when he heard the sound of air twisting again. Getting to his feet, Ichigo looked around, sword at the ready. He soon found the location of the tear in space and watched as a familiar shape leapt out of it. Ichigo was surprised when he looked at the face of Grand Fisher peeking through his broken mask, the hollow, more humanoid. Is he an Arrancar like Harribel? He wondered nervously. He remembered that Harribel told him that Grand Fisher would be stronger. Doesn't matter, he told himself. I have to beat him no matter what form he's in. Well now, the evil Hollow grinned. Back for more, I see. The Hollow was so happy to be able to kill Ichigo again he didn't even think it odd that the boy was waiting for him, too caught up in his own bloodlust to smell a trap. You won't be so lucky. I'll pay you back for what you did to my arm. Take your best shot, Ichigo shouted in defiance. This time I'm taking your head. Fat chance, Grand Fisher shouted before thrusting his clawed hand at Ichigo. His increased speed would have been all the deciding factor had it not been for Ichigo's training with Harribel. The boy dodged it at the last second and swung his sword at Grand Fisher's head, who jumped backward. I don't see that decoy he uses, Ichigo noted as he and Grand Fisher stared each other down. He must have lost it when he broke his mask. In a way, Ichigo felt relieved. The last time he fought Grand Fisher he was unable to finish him off since he took the form of his mother, Masaki Kurosaki. If Grand Fisher no longer had the decoy, then he didn't need to worry. Ichigo leapt forward, his Zanpakuto high in the air as he swung. His strike was quick and precise, just like Harribel instructed. You may only ever fight hollows, Ichigo, Harribel told him as she held him at bay, her sword at his neck, having disarmed him once more, but you must always be quick with your strikes. Your Zanpakuto's size practically telegraphs your movements to your enemy. You have to be able to move faster than your opponent can bring up his defenses. The large metal blade swung in a downward arc towards Grand Fisher's ugly face. Ichigo would leave nothing to chance this time. He would split his head in two like a watermelon. His grinned as he saw the look of desperation on Grand Fisher's face, knowing he was too slow to dodge Ichigo's attack. Which made it all the more shocking when Grand Fisher reached behind him and drew a weapon of his own, driving Ichigo back. What? Ichigo gasped when he saw the huge Zanpakuto in his hands. Damn it, if he's an Arrancar then of course he'd have a Zanpakuto just like Harribel does. He cursed himself for forgetting one of Harribel's earlier lessons. Ichigo gave a rare grin as he pushed Harribel back, the woman's eyes filled with shock. With her sword knocked away from her, Ichigo swung his sword at Harribel's neck, intending on stopping just short of a deathblow like she did. Got you. You think? Harribel asked before punching him in his stomach. When Ichigo keeled over, she shook her head. Don't be too overconfident. Never assume you've made the killing blow until after you've already made it. Damn it, Ichigo cursed. I was too full of myself. I wanted to beat him so badly I lost my cool. Grand Fisher laughed at Ichigo's deflated confidence. What's the matter, little boy? Scared? He taunted. You're not the only one with a big, hefting sword now. The Arrancar jumped up and swung his new blade at Ichigo, mirroring the boy's previous action. Die. Ichigo brought his sword up to block the attack. The sheer force of the blow alone almost made Ichigo go down onto his knees. Gah, he grunted as he struggled to stave off the killer. Ha ha ha, Grand Fisher gloated. What's the matter? Where's the drive you just had? Or are you going to clam up just like when I used your mother? He taunted. Grr. Hearing Grand Fisher mock him after using such a cheap trick burned Ichigo. Closing his eyes, he focused his energy and began to push back. I assume your friend hasn't taught you much about how to harness spirit energy? Harribel inquired as she and Ichigo took a break from sparring. No, she said to focus on just fighting with my Zanpakuto for now. She said I didn't really have the aptitude for her Kido. A fair assessment, but Kido isn't the only way to utilize your spirit energy. Even for someone like you, who specializes in melee combat, it can be a great asset. Ichigo struggled to hide his blush when she grabbed his hand, entwining her fingers with his. He was about to say something when her hand glowed yellow. How? Close your eyes, she instructed. When Ichigo obeyed, she squeezed her hand. Imagine a well. The water inside is your spirit energy. Now imagine reaching down into the well and drawing from the water. Keeping his eyes closed, Ichigo imagined himself staring down into the dark waters. Reaching down, he touched the water, which came to life. The water glowed blue as it began to travel up and wrap around Ichigo's hand, filling him with power. Harribel smiled behind her mask when Ichigo's hand glowed blue, becoming warm to the touch. Though it was a step forward in his growth, it was only an instant. Ichigo's concentration broke and the glow faded. Still, it was a necessary first step. Very good. You'll find that when you can draw upon your spirit energy, it can be used for offense and defense. It might save your life one day. Ichigo had no idea that the one day Harribel spoke of would come so soon. Visualizing the well, he called down to the murky waters below. The well glowed with a cerulean light and Ichigo was instantly filled with power. Grand Fisher was taken aback when Ichigo straightened up, his body glowing blue in the darkness as he pushed his huge Zanpakuto away. Invigorated, Ichigo began his counterattack. Over and over again the boy slashed at Grand Fisher, forcing him back. Grr, don't get cocky. Grand Fisher seethed. He didn't understand it. He thought that by becoming an Arrancar and removing his mask he'd become stronger than Ichigo ever could. Instead, he was being pushed back by a boy who'd barely defeated him not even a few days ago. Something's wrong. Why can't I draw on my full power? In the distance, Harribel watched the duel and chuckled. Grand Fisher was far more foolish than she'd originally believed. On the way to Karakura town, she duped Grand Fisher into believing that he'd reached his limit and that he had no release form for his Zanpakuto, saying that he'd been premature in his evolution and should have waited for Aizen to grant him the power of the Hogyoku. Like Ichigo, he didn't know the full power of his Zanpakuto. True, his strength had increased, but Ichigo's honed reflexes and skill more than made up the difference. It became apparent for Grand Fisher that he was on the losing end of this fight. Ichigo's strikes were relentless. It was everything the Hollow could do to block him. Unlike Ichigo, he was unskilled with such a hefty blade. Damn it, how is he this strong? Ichigo, glowing blue as the sky, gave a triumphant yell as he moved faster than Grand Fisher could block. The brute screamed as this time Ichigo sawed his arm off completely, a bleeding stump where his arm used to be. Gah, damn you, he screamed as he staggered backwards. No running this time. Ichigo pointed his Zanpakuto at Grand Fisher's face. I'm going to kill you. Panic filled Grand Fisher until his ugly lips formed a hideous smile. True, he might not have all the power an Arrancar was supposed to have, but he still had his one trump card that worked perfectly last time. Just as Ichigo was about to lunge and run his sword through Grand Fisher, the Hollow's visage started to twist. Ichigo wondered what trick his enemy had up his sleeve, only to look on in horror as Grand Fisher took on a familiar appearance. What's the matter? Grand Fisher mocked while in the guise of Masaki Kurosaki. Did you forget I can change my form? Just because I no longer have my lure doesn't mean I can't change. So come on, Ichigo, the Hollow taunted, go ahead and kill your mother. Ichigo cursed. As much as he wanted to kill Grand Fisher, he still was unable to cut his mother. But he couldn't let Grand Fisher slip away again, or else he may never have his revenge. As it turned out, Ichigo didn't need to make a decision. As Grand Fisher, Masaki stood there gloating, a bright ball of yellow light whizzed from the forest behind him, slamming into his back. Grand Fisher, Masaki's eyes widened from the sudden flash of pain before their image distorted. The Hollow growled in anger when he realized he was back to normal, with nothing stopping him from Ichigo's fury. Now that he had nothing to stop him, Ichigo readied himself for the final blow. Looking the petrified Arrancar in the eye, Ichigo seethed with vengeful anger. This is for my mother, you bastard. No. Grand Fisher stumbled backwards in a blind panic until he backed into a tree, leaving him with nowhere to flee. Spare me, he pleaded pathetically. No. Ichigo's Zanpakuto swung hard and fast. This time when he delivered the death blow there was no interference. For Ichigo it all happened so fast it was a giant blur. He swung his sword, felt the sharp edge slice through skin and bone and heard a loud cry of pain. When his mind came back into focus he looked down at the decapitated Grand Fisher. Nearby lay his severed head. I did it. He panted, feeling exhausted to the bone. He looked down at the body and realized that he'd done it. Grand Fisher was dead. Ichigo had avenged his mother. A hand on his shoulder made him jump, only to see that it was Harribel. You did well. Taking his hand, Harribel led him away from the dead body, taking him to a field nearby. As they sat down, Harribel patted his back. "I'm glad to see you took my lessons to heart. You made me proud." "Thanks," Ichigo quietly said, looking up at the sky. "How do you feel?" "I feel." Ichigo looked down at his bloody sword and remembered the feeling of vindication of striking down his mother's killer. "I feel like I can finally say goodbye to Mom." He turned to Harribel and smiled warmly at his teacher. "I can't thank you enough for doing this." "Think nothing of it, Ichigo. I simply did what I felt was the right thing." Ichigo gave his teacher a knowing smile. "When Grand Fisher took my mom's form, that was you who threw that blast, wasn't it?" Harribel's green eyes gave a tantalizing wink. "Aren't you the clever one?" "Yes, that was me. I had a suspicion that Grand Fisher would try something dishonorable like that. I felt it was the least I could without overtly interfering with your battle." She noticed that Ichigo's eyes were drooping and that the look of exhaustion was all over his face. "You look tired." "I am. Using my spirit energy like that took a lot out of me." "You'll become used to the sensation of directly drawing on your spirit energy." She leaned back and patted her lap. "Rest, Ichigo. You've earned it." Ichigo would have given his normal prudish response at the idea of sleeping in a woman's lap had it not been for the waves of fatigue. Setting his sword to the side, Ichigo laid down and rested his head in Harribel's lap, finding her thighs to be softer than he imagined. Reaching up, he grabbed Harribel's hand and squeezed. "Thanks, Harribel," he said one last time as sleep began to take him. Harribel squeezed his hand in return, finding the sight of the handsome body resting in her lap to be one she could get used to. "I'll wake you before dawn. For now, rest, Ichigo." As Ichigo fell asleep, he continued to hold on to her hand momentarily. When Harribel's hand flashed yellow, Ichigo's glowed blue, and for just a second they fused together to create an emerald light. "She's so warm," he thought before falling asleep, taking comfort in his mentor as she watched him slumber away, keeping him comfortably until the coming dawn. Days later. Las noches. "Ah, please, Master Harribel," Apache whined. "Why can't we go with you?" "I should think it obvious, Apache," Harribel scolded. "He's still wary of me. Until I fully gain his trust, it'd be best not to introduce him to the three of you. He might get the wrong impression if the three of you gang up on him." All three of the Tres Bestia groaned before lowering their heads in disappointment. They could tell that this human that Harribel was meeting with had caught her attention, and they wanted to see him with their own eyes. They wanted to meet this human that made their master so obsessed with him. When Harribel talked about him, they could see an almost tender look in her eyes, making them wonder what Harribel saw in this Ichigo Kurosaki. "Don't worry," Harribel said. "When he's ready, I'll introduce him to you. Can we have fun with him?" Apache asked hopefully, only for Mila Rose to bonk her on the head. "Yow. Idiot, could you keep your legs closed for 5 minutes instead of acting like a whore?" The dark-skinned Mila Rose chastised. "The boy belongs to Master Harribel." Harribel crossed her arms and gave her subordinate a disapproving look. "Mila Rose, Ichigo is not some possession to me. He does not belong to anyone." Her words fell on deaf ears, however, since the two girls started to bicker and argue in front of her, getting into a fight. As Apache and Mila Rose quarreled, Sung Sun walked over to her master. "Forgive me if I speak out of turn, Master Harribel, but what is this boy to you?" "What do you mean? Over the past few months, I've noticed that you've become quite fond of this Ichigo Kurosaki. I can tell that you've become very interested in his power after a while. You seem almost happy," she dared to say, knowing that she was walking a very fine line right now. Harribel turned away and contemplated Sung Sun's words. "Is that what my time with Ichigo has resulted? Is this happiness?" As a hollow, Harribel didn't think she could feel true feelings since hollows' hearts were removed from them. Hollows, even Arankars like herself, were by their very inception to be heartless. And yet, Harribel couldn't help but smile upon reflection of her time with Ichigo. It was more than just his growing power that drew her towards him. To be fair, Ichigo was still Harribel's inferior in both skill and power, in spite of all of his training. But he was showing signs of his growing potential, and that excited Harribel. But again, it wasn't just his strength that compelled Harribel to return to him. She may have been longing for a companion, but she wasn't that desperate. He is an opportunity, Harribel replied carefully. She didn't want her subordinate to get the wrong impression. Sung Sun looked at her master confused. She didn't understand what she meant, but then, judging by the expression on Harribel's face, neither did Harribel. Not wanting to continue this conversation, Harribel walked away. She looked at the small clock on the wall, depicting the time in Karakura town. She frowned behind her mask when she saw it wasn't even close to evening. If there was one thing she hated to do, it was waiting. But she was willing to be patient if it meant seeing Ichigo again. Meanwhile, Karakura town. Ichigo walked home from school, bag in hand and Rukia walking beside him. To say that it had been a harrowing few days had been an understatement. While trying to destroy hollows, he'd run afoul of his classmate, Ryu Ishida. The boy had revealed that he was a Quincy, one of the last of his kind. To make matters worse, Ryu let his pride get the better of him and he put Ichigo into a position that put many lives in danger. Thankfully, the archer came to his senses and had worked together with Ichigo to destroy the hollows that had swarmed the town, drawn to his Quincy bait. If only that had been their only problem. Walking along beside Ichigo, Rukia looked at her friend with eyes filled with suspicion. She'd noticed for several weeks that Ichigo's skill with a blade had tremendously increased. She knew he had potential, certainly more than she did when it came to Zanjutsu, and while she had trained him on the basics of combating hollows, she knew that something was up. She'd been training Ichigo to fight in her stead for almost 2 months and yet, Ichigo's growth had been almost explosive. And his spiritual pressure was also increased, leading to more confusion. Stopping for a moment, Rukia decided that she wasn't going to get answers unless she forced them out of Ichigo. Ichigo, she started, is there something that you're not telling me? She looked at Ichigo with accusing eyes, her arms crossed as she tried to understand what was happening to her friend. Ichigo fought back a shudder from the glare Rukia was giving him. He'd hoped that his rise in growth had gone unnoticed, but it appeared that Rukia was sharper than he gave her credit for. What do you mean? She looked around to make sure that nobody was near so they could talk uninterrupted. Leaning back against a wall, Rukia continued to stare at Ichigo. Don't play me for a fool, Ichigo. You've gotten better at fighting hollows. Why does that bug you? Of course I'm getting better. I've been fighting them for almost 2 months. Ichigo interjected. Rukia gave a small nod. Yes, but I've noticed that your swordplay has gotten better. You've gotten good, Ichigo, I'll give you that. However, she looked back up and her eyes narrowed. No substitute with only 2 months of experience could kill a Manos Grande. That is something that only the most skilled of Soul Reapers can accomplish. In addition to the legions of hollows that swarmed the town, a new horror had presented itself to Ichigo and his friends, a Manos Grande. The huge, towering hollow tried to blast Ichigo to atoms with a Sero. To the watching Rukia and Ryu, Ichigo used his spiritual pressure to deflect the attack up into the air. Filling his Zanpakuto with all of his spirit energy, Ichigo had leapt into the air and cut massive hollow in two, bifurcating it down the middle. I got lucky, that's all, Ichigo said in his defense. Rukia said, not buying it. And I suppose you using your spirit energy reflexively was just luck. Ichigo cursed. Under Harribel's tutelage he'd learned to use his spirit energy as a buffer. He hadn't realized that he'd done it reflexively. He struggled to come up with an excuse. He knew what Rukia's reaction would be if he confessed that he was being trained by an Arrancar. She'd be absolutely livid. A little while ago, when I was fighting a hollow, I felt my spirit energy. Ever since then I've learned how to hone it. He figured it wasn't a lie since a hollow did teach it to Ichigo. Rukia frowned. Ichigo, why didn't you tell me? When it came to Ichigo's training she only kept it to the bare minimum, not wanting Ichigo to become too used to his new role as substitute. She had no idea Ichigo's powers were growing. If anything, they should be receding while her own powers returned. Yet in spite of logic, neither had happened. She looked at Ichigo sadly. You should have told me. You know you could come to me for help. Her eyes flicked over to the bracelet on Ichigo's wrist and not for the first time she wondered where he got it. Sighing, Ichigo nodded. He was a little ashamed of himself for not trusting Rukia with his secrets. I know, I'm sorry. Getting off the wall, Rukia turned and began to walk away. Well, from now on, No more secrets. Let's go, Ichigo. Ichigo smiled and breathed a sigh of relief. He was able to get out of this jam, but how many more times would it happen before Rukia found out? Later that night, Ichigo and Harribel's training ground. So you destroyed Ameno's Grande? Harribel asked as she and Ichigo dueled. Earlier, Ichigo saw the jewel on the bracelet glow. He quickly got out of his body and sprinkled the dust over Rukia before heading out like he always did. Harribel had been waiting for him when he arrived as always, and they began to train, Ichigo telling her of his encounter with Ryu and everything that followed. Yeah, barely. I passed out right after I cut it in half, Ichigo admitted. Let that be a warning, Harribel chastised, kicking Ichigo's legs out from under him. Your spirit energy isn't infinite. You got lucky in taking down the Jillian. If you focus all of your strength into one blow and your opponent is still standing, you're going to be in a worse position. Right, Ichigo nodded. Harribel helped him up before he asked his next question. Wait, Jillian, I thought it was Ameno's Grande. It is Ameno's Grande, Harribel explained, figured Ichigo should know more about her kind. Ameno's Grande are the strongest breed of hollows, but they have their own hierarchy. Jillians are like the one that you destroyed. They are our foot soldiers and are the weakest of our kind. Ichigo paled. Wait, that thing was a foot soldier. That thing almost killed me and Ryu. Quite. You are still inexperienced and have not yet hit your full potential. As a warning, if you should encounter another one, you should run. Even if it is a Jillian, as you are, it might prove too much. You're strong, she said, putting a hand on his shoulder, but do not let pride get in the way of your reason. Ichigo couldn't help but smile. It warmed his heart knowing that Harribel cared that much about him. You said there were 3 types of Ameno's Grande. They sat down on a large stump as Harribel explained. Yes. Ameno's Grande come in 3 varieties. To put it simply, Ichigo, the smaller one is the more dangerous. Jillians like the one you fought are huge and hardly differ. Then they are the Ajukas. They are smaller than Jillians but are varied. Most take the form of animals or hulking brutes. They are incredibly dangerous, but their strength is paltry compared to a Vasto Lord. Vasto Lord, they are the strongest of hollows. In essence, they are human-shaped and quite intelligent. I am among their ranks. Ichigo's eyes ran over Harribel's beautiful body and nodded. So you were a Vasto Lord before you became an Arrancar. Correct. Be grateful that Grand Fisher didn't become a Ameno's Grande before he became an Arrancar. Had he taken the extra step, your battle with him would have been much different, she warned. Shivers ran down Ichigo's spine as he considered what his fight would have been if Grand Fisher had been smaller. Are your kind really that powerful? Harribel gave a warning nod. Yes. Be wary, Ichigo. Aside from myself there are 3 Arrancars more powerful than I, she said. But that is enough of a break, let us continue. Getting up, Ichigo nodded and drew his sword. The 2 began to spar again, but little did they know, they were not alone. Hiding within the trees was a stunned Rukia, her mouth gaping as she watched her friend train with a hollow. Ichigo, what have you done? She murmured, horrified by the boy's interactions. She'd been suspicious of Ichigo all day, and tonight proved her fears that the boy was keeping something from her. Pretending to be asleep, she let Ichigo sprinkle the powder over her face but didn't breathe it in, merely rolling over and snoring to sell the deception to Ichigo. As soon as Ichigo was gone, Rukia brushed the powder off her face and scrambled out of the closet, taking off after the boy. Following him up the mountain, Rukia was shocked beyond words to see who Ichigo was meeting with. That's a hollow. She recognized Harribel for what she was, an Arrancar. Listening to their conversation, she understood where Ichigo's sudden growth came from and how he knew things that Rukia had never told him. Rukia felt betrayed. For all Ichigo had done to accept her help and tutelage in battling hollows, here he was learning from one. Turning away, Rukia turned around and walked away, not knowing what to say to Ichigo when he returned home. We're going to have a long talk, that's for sure. Meanwhile, unknown to Ichigo and Rukia, a Senkaimon opened up in Karakura town. From it came 2 hooded men dressed in shihakushos. One of them removed his hood, revealing a head of fiery red hair. The other removed his, revealing long, jet black hair. Both men looked at each other and nodded. They were there for one thing and one thing only, the traitor, Rukia Kuchiki. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.